I was 79, the night the walls of my house leaned in and listened. Old money built the estate on the bluffs of Greyfall, where the Atlantic keeps its own council, and the wind steals names if you shout them too often. My name is Alan Crowther. I have signed papers that moved mountains, and I have shaken hands that ruined men. I learned early that fortune is a theater where everyone wears a mask, and the most convincing actors are the ones who believe themselves. For years, I believed myself. I believed the story that I, a widower with steel in his spine, could marry a woman 38 years my junior and call it love without fearing the shadow of doubt. Her name is Lila. She came into my life like a window thrown open in a stale room. Sunlight, warmth, the smell of something living, not just polished. But that night I felt air slip cold beneath the door, and I knew someone had left something for me. Not a voice, not a threat with jagged letters. A manila envelope, weighted by photographs, and a despair that had a pulse. The gate camera had glitched. The path lights had blinked. The envelope lay on the foyer table as if it had grown there. Inside were 3 photographs. Lila stepping into a narrow brick building near the harbour. Lila seated at a small cafe with a man whose face was a smear of motion. Lila in the district where night workers share cigarettes and secrets, her posture a question mark. My blood did not boil. It froze and became a mirror. I saw what fear looks like on my face, chalk above the jaw, a tremor under the eye. When you are young and betrayed, you rage. When you are old and suspect betrayal, you bargain with ghosts. I told myself the building might be a community centre, the man a cousin, the district a shortcut. But the envelope had arrived like a verdict, and money trained me to respect verdicts. At midnight, I called an old acquaintance who knew the city the way surgeons know arteries. Jonah Pike answered on the 4th ring, a gravel voice softened by bourbon and 10,000 dark hallways. He took cases no one else would touch, then set them down when they began to stink of politics. He used to be a detective in a unit that dealt with the broken parts of humanity. Now he was a private eye with a code so worn it looked like kindness from a distance. I asked if he was still working. He said, "Not for everyone, for the truth sometimes." I told him I would pay double whatever he asked, and then I said the words I had never imagined saying about the woman who slept beside me, her breath a gentle metronome on the pillow we shared. "Follow my wife." Silence on the line. Then the clink of a glass. "If I say yes," he said, "you don't get to tell me where to stop." I told him I understood. I did not. Men like me don't understand limits. We purchase exemptions. I hung up and watched the moon tilt off the ocean like a coin flipping, never landing. At dawn, Lila kissed my forehead and told me she would be at the conservatory all day. The new wing needed donor plaques reviewed. Her eyes were clear. Her voice was steady. How could lies move through such music without making a rattle? I told myself I was protecting what we had built. I told myself I was protecting her from rumors sharp as wire. The truth was meaner. I was protecting my pride. Pride is a king with a shaky crown. It uses suspicion as a scepter. When Jonah stepped through my library door later that morning, leather jacket creaking, I shook his hand and felt a tremor in his bones that matched my own. "I will be thorough," he said. "You might not like thorough." I said I preferred ugly truths to beautiful fictions. That was my first lie of the week. But the worst was yet to come. Lila was 21 when I met her. A music student playing the cello in a quartet hired for a gala. No one remembers now, though the photographs remain. Ice sculptures, gold napkin rings, men in tuxedos trying to look casual in a room that cost more to heat than most families spend in a month. I was 60 at the time, a widower of 8 years. The ache settled like a paperweight in my chest. She played with an intensity that made silence feel like a sin. When the set ended, I walked over to say something polite about art and found myself saying something honest about loneliness. She laughed, not flattered, not defensive, just human. We talked for 15 minutes. I remember because 15 minutes is what my assistant grumbled about losing from the program. We were married 3 years later, after my children sat me down like a board of directors and asked if I knew what I was doing. Of course, I said. Of course. Love makes you arrogant. It tells you that you are the exception to every rule written by sorrow. We built a careful life. We traveled to places where old stone knew how to keep a secret. We renovated the conservatory and started a scholarship for kids from neighborhoods where music is a rumor. When people stared at the age difference in restaurants, she squeezed my hand under the table, and I felt young enough to lift the sky. My friends called her a miracle. My enemies called her a strategy. A man in my position collects both. Over the years, the little anomalies accumulated the way dust does in a house where no one opens certain doors. A piece of jewelry gone for 2 days and then back in its box, slightly askew. Hours unaccounted for in a calendar otherwise precise. A glance at her phone when a certain name lit the screen, a recoil so subtle I only saw it the second time. Then the envelope arrived, and all the dust became a shape. If you are listening because you know wealth and worry make a destructive marriage, I need you to stay with me. If this story grips you, subscribe and share it, because what happened to me has nothing to do with yachts and everything to do with the way fear whispers to the heart. And tell me where you are watching from, not because it matters to my metrics, but because geography is a reminder that pain travels. Perhaps you are in a kitchen where the chair leg wobbles, or a studio apartment that laughs when you call it a home. Perhaps you are in a car, parked outside a place you cannot make yourself enter. I want you to know I was wealthy enough to buy privacy, and yet poverty-stricken in trust. That combination ruins empires and marriages with equal appetite. People assume a May-December marriage is a contract written in sand. They are wrong. It is a contract written in blood, and every day you sign again with the pressure of your choices. I had chosen generosity. I had chosen patience. I had also chosen surveillance. Only for a week, I told myself, only to soothe the mind. That is how a man like me rationalizes placing a leash on love. We call it caution, or stewardship, or the necessary audit. But the impulse is simpler and darker. Control. The first day, Jonah sent me a text with a photograph of the brick building by the harbor. She went in at 10:42, he wrote. No signage. Hour later, she came out. Same entrance. I stared until the pixels wavered. The second day, he sent me a midday shot of the cafe. Lila at an outdoor table with a man whose hat brim shadowed his jaw. Conversation restrained, he wrote. Not romantic. I should have felt relief. Instead, my mind turned the screw. If not romantic, then strategic. If not an affair, then a scheme. The third day, a message at dusk. Same district as photo 3, narrow alley. She gave something small to a girl in a red coat, followed the girl to a tenement. Door watcher, don't know yet. I could smell my life scorching at the edges, and I still put the pan back on the flame. I told the staff to say nothing, to ask nothing. I told myself to remain civilized while my stomach wove knots. That night, Lila came to bed late, hair still warm from a shower, and I pretended sleep. There is a particular cowardice in imitating sleep beside the truth. It felt like forging my signature on my own conscience. On the fourth day, the text did not come. I paced the library like a man waiting for a verdict that could unmake a century of decisions. I told myself he was simply being thorough, that he would call with a tapestry of facts, and I would pay him with gratitude and forget the smell of that envelope. When the call finally came, his first sentence put a crack through the room. "I'm returning your retainer," he said. "I can't continue." I demanded an explanation. He said 5 words that left ice in my lungs. "This is not your story." He hung up. But the worst was yet to come. I have survived acquisitions, exposés, sudden storms at sea, a boyhood that taught me hunger has a voice, and a boardroom that taught me charm can swing a blade. What I had not survived, apparently, was a boundary. Jonah's refusal bruised my certainty and made it bleed. I called again. Voicemail. I called a third time. Finally, a text. "We shouldn't speak on this line." I drove myself. something I had not done in years. Chauffeurs are a way of moving without thinking. The wheel reminded me what it means to be responsible for direction. Grey Falls Harbour keeps its secrets stacked in brick, salt whitened, windows fogged by the breath of the wary. I parked where my car would not insult the street. The building from the photograph looked like the city had forgotten to condemn it. Inside, I expected a shadow market, or at least a shadow. What I found was a room with folding chairs and a whiteboard listing first names, a schedule, a phone tree. On a table, thermoses, crackers, a little pile of toys, a stack of pamphlets about legal aid and crisis counseling. A woman with an exhausted smile asked if I was here to volunteer. I said my wife had been by. She asked who my wife was. I said her first name, simple on my tongue but heavy in the room. Lila, she repeated, and something in her face that had been standing decided to sit. She told me they run a quiet resource hub for women who don't want the attention a shelter draws. She told me a donor paid the rent in cash. She told me on Tuesdays and Fridays a private physician came to do checkups without billing, and on Wednesdays a lawyer answered questions, no paper trail. I asked who funded this carefully invisible goodness. She said donors, plural, but the original donor had insisted on anonymity. I asked how long. She said 2 years. I had not known. Is that a crime in a marriage, to not know the shape of your spouse's mercy? I asked if a man in a hat had met with her there. The woman's eyes slid, then settled. No men in here, she said. That's the rule. She lifted a pamphlet. Do you want to leave a number in case your wife wants you to know more? It was the kindest dismissal I had ever received. I walked out into street light and wind, and the taste of salt in my mouth like a scold. At the cafe, I bribed a server with 100 and a confession that I was trying to surprise my wife with an anniversary gift and needed to know the name of a friend she had met here last week. He told me he didn't remember faces. I left another 100 and my card. He told me the man's name was Reed and that he came on Thursdays, alone, ordered tea, stayed an hour, then left with no hurry. He pointed to the corner table where the camera would have captured angles. The manager said footage was overwritten every 72 hours. It had been 80 when I reached out to a friendly judge about a little private access to municipal cameras for nostalgia, not to be used in any way that could upset the natural order. He told me the cameras in that alley had been flagged for maintenance for 2 weeks. Maintenance is a word that covers a multitude of sins. Back at the estate, I found my son in my study, uninvited but unafraid. Harrison has my jaw and none of my patience. He asked if I was all right. I asked why I wouldn't be. He said my assistant had mentioned I seemed distracted, that I had missed the call with Zurich, that I had cancelled lunch with the minister. I told him I was focused on something that did not concern him. He told me that when a man my age gets focused, it frequently becomes a medical concern for everyone. He asked if Lila was all right. I told him to leave it. He did not. He asked if I remembered what paranoia did to Grandad. My father had seen enemies at the end of every hallway. Half of them were actually his reflection, and that made him twice as dangerous. I slept poorly. Every sound lengthened into theory. Lila turned once in her sleep and murmured, a little sound like a bird checking if the air was still there. At breakfast, she wore blue and told me the roses would be late this year. I asked if she had enjoyed the conservatory yesterday. She said there was a problem with the donor wall spacing, and she had stayed until they were satisfied. She looked down at her hands and smoothed the napkin. Lies are not always loud. Sometimes they are the quietest thing in the room. Or perhaps the lie was mine, pretending to ask about plaques when what I meant was, where were you? Who with? Do I still exist in your world? I went to Jonah's office, a second-floor walk-up over a locksmith. The door was ajar. He was packing. The desk was a landscape of envelopes, a camera, a spiral notebook with edges softened by the company of pockets. He looked older by a decade. I'm not taking your money, he said, before I could speak. I'm not taking your permission or your permission to be angry either. You found something, I said. You always find something. I found myself, he said. And then he grimaced at the melodrama of it. I found a conflict of interest. I found a line from my past that runs straight through your present, and I won't be the one to redraw it. I hired you, I said. You don't get to leave me in a tangle of half-truths and red coats. You hired me, he said, to tell you if your wife was breaking your heart. That isn't what's happening, you're breaking your own. I reached for my checkbook in the same motion I have used to end arguments since I was 25. He put up a hand. Don't, he said. Money is loud, and you need quiet. He slid a small key across the desk. Locker at the bus station on Merton. There's a file. Take it. Read it alone. He paused, then added, and when you think you know what to do next, wait a day. Why did you give up the case? I asked. He looked at the window like there was something worth seeing besides old brick. Because sometimes the only way to protect the truth is to refuse to sell it, he said. And because I owe someone. He would not say who. He would not say for what. He would not say whether that someone was alive or a ghost. He would not say Lila's name. He would not say mine. He would not say anything except, don't go to the locker tonight. Which is, of course, exactly what I did. But the worst was yet to come. The bus station on Merton wears resignation like a coat. People there were waiting for departures that would take them to places only slightly different than the ones they had left. The locker bank smelled of metal and human weather. I slid the key into 217 and opened a private storm. Inside, a paper file thick with lives, witness statements, photocopies of police reports with names blacked out, a list of transfers from one of my holding companies to a phalanx of non-profits that existed and did not exist, depending on the day. At the bottom, photographs. Not the kind from envelopes that tear marriages. The kind that stitch the world into a pattern you don't want to recognize. There was a picture of Lila, younger, from before me, sitting on the steps of a community arts center I later learned had closed when their funding dried up. There was a picture of a girl who looked like Lila if you turned down the light, standing in front of a door with an angry landlord in the background. On the back, a first name, Wren. There were notes about a case Jonah had worked years ago, when he was still on the force, involving a network that traded in what decent people pretend not to believe happens. In the margins, a handwriting that was not Jonah's had written 2 words next to certain names: protected, lost. I found a ledger that made my stomach tighten into a fist. Someone had been siphoning from my foundation's discretionary budget. 10,000 here, 15 there, routing it through a consulting firm and into a trust that paid the rent at that brick building, the doctor who came on Thursdays, the lawyer who came on Wednesdays. The consulting firm was run by a man named Reed, the same Reed from the cafe. There was a line item labeled Scholarship Wren. The dates began before I met Lila. They continued after. I read the witness statements. I learned that Wren was Lila's sister, not by blood, but by that fierce covenant forged when you are 14 and life tries to break you and someone shows up with a hand and a promise. They had met at that art center. They had been taken in by the same director when home was a hazard. Years later, Wren had fallen into a violence that leaves no bruise the police will record. Lila had pulled her out twice. The third time required money, a lawyer, a quiet, safe place. It required it for more than Wren. It required it for others. Lila had found donors the way some people find constellations, seeing connections where I saw only darkness. She had written to a dozen wealthy patrons after we married. Most had ignored her. One had answered. The anonymous donor who paid the rent. The ledger said it was me. The money had gone from my accounts, yes, but not because I had scrawled any generosity. The consulting firm had billed us for program evaluation across my philanthropic portfolio, then redirected a portion quietly to the trust. The authorizing signature on those invoices belonged to my chief financial officer, a man named Victor Danes, tall, careful, a friend from my middle years when we thought nights lasted forever. In the file, A note in Jonah's hand linked Victor to a board member at a rival foundation, under investigation for misappropriation and exposure of survivor identities. Another page listed meetings between Victor and Reed. Not many. Enough. Sometimes the ground opens, and you must decide what to throw in to make it stop swallowing your life. My first instinct was to protect myself with rage. Victor had built my ledgers like cathedrals. I had prayed in them. If he had risked my fortune and my name, he had done so with the certainty that I would blame anyone else first. Lila, the age difference, the story people told about us when they were feeling cruel. He had counted on my pride to turn me into a weapon against my wife. I returned home slow, as if my car weighed more with the knowledge it carried. Lila was in the music room, bow floating over the strings like a hawk over field. She paused when I came in, saw the file in my hands, and closed her eyes. When she opened them, the fear I had been bracing for was not there, only grief and a kind of relief that shamed me. "I was going to tell you," she said, "and then I wasn't, and then I was again. Shame is a seesaw." I set the file down. "You lied," I said. "You told me donor plaques and spacing." She nodded. "I did," she said, "because I once told a man like you the truth, and he used it like a key to open doors that should have stayed locked. And because I asked your people for help 3 years ago, and someone who works for you tried to purchase the problem instead of solve it." "Victor," I said. The name tasted like betrayal and whiskey. "He moved money. He also met with Reed. Reed is clean," she said. "He has lived with his hands in the light for a decade. He saved Ren. He saved me when I thought saving was a thing money did. It isn't. Money is a tool. People do the saving." I felt humiliation tighten my throat. "You should have told me." "I should have," she said. "But you are a man who likes to fix, and this was a wound that needed tending, not fixing, and there was something else." She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a photograph. Jonah and a younger Lila in a fluorescent-lit hallway, two faces that had seen something and decided to keep seeing anyway. "He was the officer who took my statement when I was 19, she said. "He was the one who sat with me when Ren wouldn't talk to anyone else. He is the reason I still breathe to rhythm. He gave up your case because he recognized my name on the street again and realized he could not be in this story twice. Not for money. Not for you, not for me." I stared at the man I had tried to hire like a scalpel and saw finally a shield. "What about Victor?" I said, "and the consulting firm, and the way the money moved like a lie?" "Victor wanted you to find out I was involved without learning why," she said. "He wanted you to burn the trust and me with it. Reed learned he was siphoning from your foundation, but kept the operation intact to protect the women. He was going to tell me and ask me to tell you. Then your envelope arrived." She looked at me past the blur in her eyes. "It was mailed from a P.O. box rented by Victor's assistant. He accelerated the suspicion, hoping to force your hand, to make you choose between your name and my work." My hands trembled. "If you have never felt your power turned against you like a mirror that burns, consider yourself blessed. I had the means to end a man. I had also the means to ruin a good thing, by mistaking it for a scheme. Tomorrow," I said, "I will walk Victor out of the building quietly, and I will wire auditors into every room he has ever entered. I will not light a public fire that warms no one. But if he has endangered a survivor, I will bring heaven's law and the city's." Lila set the photograph down. "There's more," she said. "Ren is back in the city. She's sober. She wants to meet you. She has been terrified you would see me and decide I am a charity. She needs you to know I am not." "I don't," I said, and I meant it. After a life of treating love like a ledger, here was an entry that did not balance and did not need to. I took her hand and waited for the room to stop swaying. Out the window, the ocean flicked at the rocks like a cat impatient with a curtain. I thought the worst had passed. I was wrong. An hour later, as if fear had a calendar, my phone rang. Jonah. His voice was thin, as if speaking through gauze. "Danes knows," he said. "He knows you have the file. He's leaving for the airport with a go bag. I asked how he knew. Because he called me, Jonah said, and offered me triple to bring you to a meeting at a storage facility on Pierce Avenue with the file in hand. He thinks I never gave it to you. He thinks money still buys me. I told him I was retiring. He coughed. I'm not accompanying you anywhere, Crowther, but I'll be parked across the street. If you go, go with your eyes open. I told him I would send security. No, he said. No, Muscle, not this time. If you show up with men, he will make it a scene, and scenes spill. So I went, alone, to a storage facility at the city's edge where metal doors keep memories from bumping into one another. Victor stood in the corridor, composed, hair perfect, go-bag at his feet. Alan, he said, as if we had encountered each other at a golf club. This is unfortunate. Not as unfortunate as prison, I said. Walk me through the arithmetic. He sighed. A man asked to explain fine art to a Philistine. The world is full of needs, and you are full of resources. My redirection was a kindness. But your wife brought volatility. Reed is not what he pretends. He has friends who prefer the margins. You have been financing an operation with no oversight. You mean you have? I said. With stolen funds? He shook his head. It is not theft to allocate where a leader refuses to lead. He lifted his bag. You can try to drag me through a performative reckoning, but you will not stain me without staining yourself. We built the Foundation's reputation together. If you burn my name, you set your own on fire, and the wind is strong this season. He stepped closer, too familiar. You cannot be seen as the old fool whose child bride ran a shadow charity through his accounts. I let the insult sit between us like a test I would not take. You sent the envelope, I said. He did not deny it. I trusted you because you knew how to be necessary, I said. That was my laziness. That ends today. From across the street, Jonah's car idled like a witness. I thought of Lila's hand on a bow. I thought of Wren's name next to protected. I thought of my father's paranoia and the way it ate his life like moths that love only the best suits. I dialed a number I had been given by the only prosecutor I trust, a woman who has never learned the language of fear. I described a series of transactions, a consulting firm, an assistant with a P.O. box, and a very quiet room in a storage facility where a man was telling me he had done me a favor by stealing. Victor smiled, a thing with no warmth. You won't do it, he said. You haven't the stomach. I am old, I said, and my stomach has survived worse. I held up the file. You thought this would blow my marriage. It clarified it. I walked past him, file in my arm, and I did not turn when he called my name a second time, like a man realizing he has misread a script. Outside, the air had the clean aftertaste of rain that never fell. Jonah lifted 2 fingers from the steering wheel. He looked tired and whole. You did not go in with men, he said. That matters. Thank you, I said, for giving up the case. He nodded. Some things aren't cases, he said. They're lifelines. He put the car in gear. Go home. Tell the truth. Let it do its work before you try to do yours. I stood there in the humming quiet of storage and felt the world tilt towards something like mercy. But the worst was yet to come. The worst was not scandal. It was not bankruptcy. It was not the gossip pages with their algae-colored headlines. The worst was the long, slow inventory of all the moments I had chosen suspicion over conversation. The weeks that followed were work set to a human tempo. The prosecutor moved with calm ferocity. Victor was arrested without spectacle. The assistant with the P.O. box took a plea and told the story straight. Reed sat across from me in my study, while the fire remembered how to be generous and explained how he had been funneling funds back into the trust whenever a safe donation could be found, trying to keep the rent paid without lighting an alarm. He had not skimmed. He had not lied. He had protected names with an almost religious devotion. I wrote checks where they were needed, this time with my name signed not as a performance, but as an admission that power should not be a secret. Wren came to the conservatory on a Thursday when the roses decided to arrive after all. She had Lila's eyes and a way of standing that said she had learned to face doors square. She thanked me for the scholarship we both knew I had not known I had given. I told her I was trying to learn how to be the kind of man people can tell the truth. She smiled like a person who has become her own country and is deciding whether to issue visas. We took a walk past the lilies. She told me she was starting to teach small children rhythm as a language. I told her rhythm had saved me more than once. We did not pretend this made us family. We did not pretend it didn't. At home, Lila and I began the slow repair that lovers attempt when time has done some of the damage, with its ordinary clumsiness, and pride has done the rest with its skill. We learned new questions, not where were you, but how can I stand with you? Not what did you hide, but what did I refuse to see? I apologized for hiring a man to follow her, instead of finding the courage to follow my fear back to its source. She apologized for thinking that protecting me meant keeping me blind. We both learned that secrecy and privacy are not synonyms. Privacy is a door you close to rest. Secrecy is a door you lock to lie. We began to practice the sacred art of telling each other the hard parts before they hardened. I visited Jonah one last time. He had sold his office furniture to a young investigator who thought she could change the world and had not yet learned that sometimes the world is not the thing that must change. He said he was going fishing inland. He said men like us often discover we have not earned the quiet. I told him I had spent a lifetime earning noise and was ready to start again. He handed me a small, battered metronome. "For your music room," he said. "It's good to be reminded there's a beat under the chaos." I asked if he regretted giving up the case. He said no. "Giving up a case is not giving up on people," he said. "Sometimes it's the only way to stay useful." In the months that followed, the foundation changed shape. We built an internal firewall that did not depend on anyone's virtue. We brought the brick building into the daylight without dragging its people into glare. We funded 3 more sites in neighborhoods that knew how to survive. We published guidelines that said clearly that the dignity of the vulnerable is not a cost center. A magazine tried to make a story of our scandal and found none they could sell. They wrote instead about art and healing, which sells less but lives longer. At night, when the house is quiet enough to hear what the ocean says when it thinks no one is listening, I sit with Lila and let her play. I have learned the sounds my heart makes when fear puts on a mask that looks like prudence. I have learned to ask for the lights to be turned on before I decide the room is empty. What remains after the noise is not silence. It is a finer music. It is the knowledge that love is not proved by surveillance, but by the courage to face your reflection and admit the parts that need to grow. If this story met you where you live, stay with me. Subscribe so we can keep talking about the things money complicates and the truths it cannot buy. Tell me where you are watching from, so I can imagine your street when I speak about mine. If you are standing at the edge of an envelope you did not ask for, do not open it alone. Invite the truth in. Give it a chair. Listen for the beat beneath the chaos. That rhythm is where your life begins again. I began this as a man who thought the world owed him clarity. I end it as a man who knows clarity is a gift you earn by telling the truth before it's convenient. I hired a detective to follow my wife. He gave up the case. What he gave me instead was a way back to myself. And if you think that is sentimental, you have not yet lived long enough to understand how radical tenderness can be. I was certain the worst was yet to come. I was wrong. The worst had already happened. The best arrived when I finally chose to see.